when you think of how many, major movie stars there are that are out, not many.
Oh, yeah.
So, I think there's still some ceilings to bash through.
Hi, and welcome to your Access All Areas podcast, where we talk candidly to Australia's finest performing artists about their lives and the lessons they have learned along the way. So welcome to McLaren Versus. Today, I have the absolute pleasure of sitting down with a man who has taken the world by storm. From his early days on Aussie screens to becoming a global sensation, this Emmy award-winning powerhouse has redefined what it means to be a character actor. Now, whether it's his unforgettable turn as the charming yet chaotic Armand in The White Lotus, his heart-wrenching performance in The Last of Us, or his beautifully nuanced roles in Looking and Physical, he brings depth, soul, and an undeniable magnetism to everything he does. He's a storyteller, a risk taker, and an actor who makes you feel every moment. And today he is here with me on McLaren Versus. Murray Bartlett, welcome.
Thanks, Spencer. Wow, what a lovely introduction. That I was like, wow, I wonder who that guy is that he's talking about. Oh my God. But that's very, very lovely of you to say. You also are a wonderfully accomplished and awesome actor. So I want to do a long spiel about you, but I guess maybe this isn't the right.
Just send it to me later. I'll get it done on voiceover. It's fine.
Okay.
Yeah, sure. The sentiment, but today it's all about you. And we were just before you're in Ireland at the moment, so we've caught you. Is it Dublin you're in, or where are you?
No, I'm in Belfast in the north.
Right.
Yeah, and we're actually mostly sort of in the countryside. Been up on the north coast and all around. It's absolutely gorgeous. So green. Oh my God. Yeah. Well, it rains a lot, so it better be, I guess. Yeah. It's really like living up to all my sort of fantasy expectations of Ireland. But yeah, no, it's been gorgeous, and working with a lovely group of people, including, as we just spoke about, a much more famous Australian actor, Hugh Jackman. Yep. But yeah, just a gorgeous group on a beautiful script,
isn't it? Because you worked.
What's that?
It's a reuniting for you two.
Yeah, that's right. Yeah, a long time ago. It feels like another lifetime in a way.
You're not playing his lover in this one, though. Is that correct?
I'm not. No,
Robin Hood
I do.
Twist,
I do play some, mysterious person that's, is from his past. So, I kind of am that in his real life. Who's this guy? I vaguely remember him from 2 decades ago in Australia.
I'm sure that's what he's somewhere,
Exactly. Yeah.
So today I want to take the chance to look back a little bit, I guess, and yes, we'll obviously get to the more recent overnight successes, if I could use that phrase, that I guess a lot of people now know you for. But I thought maybe we would start by going back to little childhood Murray, who grew up in Perth, Western Australia, before heading off to Sydney to chase your acting dream. And so I'm really interested to understand what kind of a kid were you, and how did your upbringing shape the person you are now, do you think?
I was very sensitive kid with a huge imagination. So I remember being out in front of, we lived on this quite busy road when I was very young in Perth, and I would be out the front dressed in some sort of cape or coat or something in my own world, just wandering around talking to imaginary friends and creating worlds. So maybe it was destiny. I ended up doing something like that for a living. But yeah, I always sort of gravitated, I guess, to creative things and anything that required sort of imagination and creativity, I suppose. But I did have a sort of a formative situation that kind of propelled me into being more sort of consciously creative. I got my my brother accidentally knocked my teeth out with a hammer, my baby teeth, and he was trying to kill a spider on a rock, and I was standing too close behind him. Yeah, and then I was sort of had a tendency to do like dancing around in my own world, listening to music, wrapped in a blanket at this point in our basement, which had a concrete floor, chipped over and knocked out my two bottom baby teeth. So for many years, or a couple of years before my big person teeth grew in, I couldn't say S, I said F. And so my mum sent me to a speech therapist to learn how to say S. And it was this amazing woman who kind of changed my life and got me doing monologues and poems and stuff in order to say S properly. But then once I could say S, I just kept working with her for years on doing speech and drama exams and stuff, and just absolutely loved it. But yeah, that's sort of kind of the story of my life. I'd kind of float along and bump into things and like, oh, this seems good. And like, just kind of, that sort of sums up the kind of spirit of my early life, I feel like, in some ways.
I guess it begs the question then, doesn't it? Did you actively make a choice to say, yes, I want to be an actor, or did you, like you say, just sort of drift along that path? And the next thing was to do local studies and then attending NIDA, which is our National Institute of Dramatic Art here in Australia, the premier acting school. But how did you come to the decision to say that this could be a career, or something that I could do every day?
I mean, I think I kind of did fall into it, and then just loved it. So it was really a love thing for most of my childhood. And then I auditioned for a high school that had a drama course and got into that and went to that, and that was amazing. But it was sort of like just, oh, this seems good. And then it wasn't really until the end of high school where I really wanted to go to NIDA. I had my sights set on that as a goal, and I had my NIDA audition was at the same time as my leaving exams for high school. Mm-hmm. So I remember at that point thinking, where do I put my energy here? Do I really want this to be an actor, or do I, put my energy more into my school exams? Because in a way, that's the way it appeared to me. I kind of had to make a choice at that point, because I had my NIDA audition, I had an exam, I had a callback, I had another exam, and then I had, I think, another callback. And so it was all kind of in together. And I really threw myself into that audition because I'd sort of at that point was like, yeah, I think this is something that I would like to do for, consciously as like a career choice, or, an attempt to make it a career. So I did pass my exams, but not with flying colours, but I did get into NIDA. So that was lucky.
I think I followed in your footsteps, a few years later from a studying perspective and heading to NIDA. And, I certainly know that for me, that was a life-changing experience. But I'm also very aware that not everyone has the best time going through that school. It can be very challenging. It's 3 years, very full-on, non-stop. And how did you find it?
I'm super grateful to have gone there. It set me up in the industry, in some ways, which were great. Like you're on a platform that's fantastic to go into the industry. And I came out with lots of tools in my toolbox, but I was so scared. Yeah. And I kind of wish somehow I'd been able to, had some sort of means of keeping a hold of my confidence or building up at the same time. But, that just wasn't my trajectory. And like over the years following, I had to kind of go through that process of like figuring that out and finding my confidence again. And so I would say it was a great experience for acting. It was like an amazing experience for life for me going through NIDA, because it really it sort of broke me in pieces a bit, I think. And then the years after, I kind of was sort of putting myself back together in terms of my confidence and stuff. So and that was really useful. I'd had a pretty, I had challenges in my life, in my early life, but it was fairly, painless and wonderful.
All right, let's fast forward a bit, and if we look at your early career, it's pretty much, a stalwart of everything Australia ever produced. You clearly found your way quite well onto our screens. The obligatory session on Neighbours and Home and Away, and of course the wonderful show The Secret Life of Us. Would be remiss if I didn't mention that.
Oh my God, yes.
With that kind of success, though, what made you say, I'm going to go overseas? I wonder what drove you to head to the US.
Coming out of NIDA, as I said, I was kind of terrified. I was really scared of. I don't know why I just work situations, acting situations just came with this kind of terror, and I felt like it prevented me. It was like this layer on top of me that, from the inside, felt like I wasn't able to access all the things that I thought would make me a good actor. I just felt like I was kind of a bit paralyzed by this layer of fear on top of me. And I think coming out of NIDA and sort of, coming off that platform and then sort of starting to work pretty quickly and I mean, I wasn't, working all the time or, on it, but I was working enough but I felt like I'd come out as this version of myself that as the years went by, I was outgrowing. But because I was still in that environment and that industry there that sort of, I think, was seeing me as the way that I was when I came out of NIDA, or this is how it felt for me anyway. I may have been projecting this, but I felt like I was sort of stuck in an old version of myself as a person and as an actor. When I went to New York and did classes, I found myself doing what I was saying before about that I couldn't do when I was at NIDA. I found myself being in classes thinking, this is interesting, but this is not for me. And I felt myself feeling who I was in that moment. And because I was in New York and nobody knew who I was, and not that I wasn't famous in Australia or anything, but like I'd sort of carved out a bit of a sort of I don't know, a trajectory of jobs and a kind of a version of myself in Australia that I could leave behind when I went to New York and kind of be like, well, who am I now? Who am I as a person? Who am I as an actor? What do I like? Do I like, no, this class doesn't work for me. Like, oh my God, this teacher is amazing. I love this kind of style or whatever. And it just felt like, the beginning. It felt like as if I'd just graduated from NIDA with confidence.
Yeah.
I'm like, oh, okay, all right, here we go. Then let's start now. I have a better sense of myself. I have a better sense of what works for me as a person and as an actor. And I was anonymous. So there was no one reflecting back to me or me projecting that they're reflecting back to me an old version of myself. I could just be who I was in that moment. And that felt incredibly freeing.
Okay, right.
And why New York, not LA?
LA, in terms of the weather and the landscape and everything, feels a lot more like Australia to me. New York is just this like, New York is New York. Like there's nothing like it.
Yeah.
And also I think I was a bit intimidated by a lot of the industry stuff in LA, whereas you can be an unemployed actor in New York and have a great time. Like there's lots of stuff to do. There's lots of, fringe theater and like workshops and classes and stuff. I feel like at that time anyway, it felt harder to do that in LA. You felt like you're surrounded by the industry, everyone that serves you as an actor. Like there's a sort of an expectation, or that's what I felt there anyway. Like this sort of, you can't disappear into the world in LA because the world, for the most part, is the entertainment industry. So yeah, there was just so many things I loved about the experience of living in New York, as well as sort of it just felt like it fit. Things were flowing. I was meeting great people. I went for 4 months. I extended my tourist visa. This was what was happening. This was the kind of things that were happening to me, where I started going to there's this incredible sort of get together on Wednesday nights, or it used to be on Wednesday nights. I think it's still going, called Naked Angels. where you'd go along and amazing writers, playwrights and screenwriters would turn up, and a bunch of actors would turn up. They'd cast the stuff they were working on the spot, and you'd get up and you'd read this stuff, and it was just like amazing. And some of my heroes were there, and so there's stuff like that in New York that's just so exciting. And I was in the room with like some of these writers who I just like still some of my favorites. And so I went to that regularly, made friends with some people, made friends with this guy who was friends with this woman who was friends with like one of the producers of Sex and the City. And after a few months, he was like, oh, you know what? They're looking for this like non-American. And I think they wanted Ewan McGregor or something, but then he fell out at the last minute. And he said, I mentioned you to my friend, and she mentioned you to her friend who's a producer. And they, and before I knew it, like the next day I got sides, and then I was in a cab, and I was like in a room with Sarah Jessica Parker. And then I booked this like episode of Sex and the City, which was just surreal, but it was one of those New York experiences that I think, most people have in New York. Like, it's just this sort of, there's a kind of a rhythm and a flow to New York that when you get into it, shit happens, and it's really exciting, and it feels kind of magical. And I had that experience. I mean, I didn't have that kind of experience for a number of years again, but it hooked me in, and it began something. And from that job, I got an agent, and like there was just kind of like, it felt like the place that I needed to be. And I thought a few times about going to LA, but it just didn't feel like my place. And I'm glad I didn't go. I really like being in LA now. I have a different relationship with it, but at the time it just didn't feel like the right place to me. And I don't think that I necessarily would have done that well there, because I don't think I would have been very happy.
Right. If we can talk about some LGBTQI stuff just for a minute, what do you think has led you to play so many amazing gay roles so far in your career?
I was so excited to step into gay roles and have the opportunity to, attempt to play a three-dimensional character that people could relate to, and to not make it and the kind of stereotypes that rub against me or that I'd seen that I didn't relate to or whatever, and kind of have the opportunity. I mean, I think, it's one of the reasons, it sounds cheesy, but it's one of the reasons why we do this, I think, is that you want to kind of open people's hearts and minds. And particularly when you're playing a character from a marginalized community, you've got this great opportunity to hopefully open people's hearts and minds a bit. And I just relished that. Continue to relish that. So would I have had a different trajectory if I didn't do as many gay roles or try to steer away from them? Maybe, I don't know. But would it have been as satisfying? I don't know. I mean, I love the roles that I've got to play, and I love where it's brought me. So, I think when you think of how many, major movie stars there are that are out.
Mm.
Not many.
Oh, yeah.
So I think there's still some ceilings to bash through, for sure. I think we're in that, leveling up process with, everyone in the LGBTQI community of like representation and having sort of, LGBTQI actors being considered for LGBTQI characters. And, we're in that process, and we're well into that process. There's been a lot of sort of leaps and bounds forward in that. There's still a ways to go. I mean, there's still a ways to go with, women playing lead roles, for God's sake. And, or being the center of stories, there's so many, which we're leveling up on so many fronts.
I love that phrase, leveling up, because it gets us out of this dynamic that can sometimes really be combative, but instead, this is really about coming into your fullness in many ways and being recognised and appreciated. I have to say that you and the roles you have chosen, you've created some astonishing characters. I mean, White Lotus, that show has taken the world by storm, and to have Armand there at the forefront of that, and also Frank in The Last of Us as well. I mean, what a surprising turn that show took for me when that episode started. I mean, I played a few sessions of the game, but I didn't know it that well, and when it came to that episode, I couldn't believe what I was watching. It was like, I was sat there thinking, oh, gee, imagine if they were gay, wouldn't that kind of thing. And then I was just like, what is happening here?
I know it's brilliant storytelling, isn't it? Because it's buried in this show where you don't really expect a love story like that, let alone, a love story between two men. And it just, and also that Nick Offerman's character, is set up in a way that you also you make all these assumptions about him that take you down a road, and then you realize that you've gone down the wrong road, and it's a completely different story. And it's so brilliant, I think, because it's completely disarming.
Yeah.
And also for an audience, a pretty broad audience, and probably a lot of the audience of The Last of Us, not necessarily, that familiar with watching the love story between two men. So it's just brilliant storytelling. I think it's just you're into it before you know it, and I think because of that, it sort of disarms you enough that I think it holds off a lot of your judgments about it. And then you can kind of, I think one of the beautiful things for us in the response to it is that people received it as this beautiful love story first. And then the fact that it was between two men was, important and a gorgeous thing, but people hit the kind of the love story first, and were sort of I think people's judgments about the fact that it was between two men were sort of suspended a bit because of the way that the story was told, which is just really, really clever and really wonderful, and just beautiful to be part of, telling a gorgeous love story like that in the midst of, a very dark situation. So gorgeous. Yeah.
Do you feel any kind of a weight of responsibility to the community? I mean, given the position you hold, as I said, you're at the forefront of playing some of these amazing roles, and in some ways, just by default, you're a semi-activist of sorts. Do you feel a sense of responsibility in some way there?
I guess I feel like a responsibility to not veer into negative stereotypes, and to not make any character two-dimensional. But particularly playing a gay character, because there is still, a big chunk of the world that is not accepting of gayness, queerness, or has issues with it, or has it's a bit of a stumbling block to be able to go into that character in a way that you think, how can I make this character three-dimensional and human and universal in a way that I can contact those people who haven't yet been able to connect and identify with a person that's outside of their sort of comfort zone. And so I feel like incredibly passionate about that. I mean, I feel incredibly passionate about that with every character I get to play, but there's a little bit extra with a gay or queer character, because it's a marginalized community that's not completely accepted yet by chunks of the world. So yeah, I mean, I think it's tricky when you're making stories about, when you're playing gay characters, or when you're in a show or a film that is sort of telling a queer or gay story, because there's still a sort of a lack of stories that make it out into the world that are centered on LGBTQI communities or characters, there's this sort of hope and expectation that each of those films or shows is going to represent absolutely everybody and everybody's going to be able to relate to it. And that is a mammoth task and probably impossible.
Yeah.
And so it's tricky. And I remember when we were making Looking, like there was a lot of negative response to that show because some people didn't feel like it was representative enough of the whole community. And it was never conceived in that way. It was about this group of friends and their, the people around them. And those, those friends, those core friends were gay. And so it's tricky because on one hand, you want to be everything to everyone. And you want, because there's sort of, it's getting better, but there's been a lack of representation of the LGBTQI community. Like you want to put something out that just, allows people to feel seen and is a great show and is telling great stories that are meaningful. And also everyone, feels like it's part of them or, and it's very difficult to do that. Without spreading yourself too thin and trying to cover so much ground that it feels like a teaching moment. You know what I mean?
I think the point you make about when you're playing these roles and putting these stories out there that you can't please all the people all the time. That good old catchphrase there and more elegantly put by you that you can't represent everybody. So I guess it's not really surprising there was some pushback, on Looking because everybody wants it to represent them. And I mean, such a beautiful show. I must say, I adored that show. It was so sad when it ended, but I guess it certainly showed us just how hungry we were for representation.
Yeah, I should say we got a lot of positive feedback about that show as well. But it was kind of there was a lot from both sides. Yeah. And one of the wonderful things about doing a job like that is we heard from people from the LGBTQI community in, Poland and in countries in the world where they can't live, out and proud and free. And they're just wonderful, heartbreaking in many ways, but also just beautiful messages of oh my God, it's so amazing to see, people living freely and feeling seen and, characters that I can identify with. And I just, this is kind of, just beautiful, the stuff that you want to be reaching people and for people to be moved or changed or expanded in some way by what you're doing. So it is a beautiful thing when you get those kind of responses, which we did from that show, which was amazing.
The list of people you have worked with is quite impressive to date. You're back working with Hugh Jackman right now, Jonathan Groff, Laura Linney, Olympia Dukakis, Jennifer Coolidge, Juliette Lewis, Pedro Pascal. I mean, it's ridiculous, Now, they're all obviously very, very different artists, but I wonder, have you drawn any inspiration from any of them in terms of a process? And, have you found some of them more difficult than others or trickier to plug into when working together?
It's interesting. Some people who are very well known, some people, there's a very varying kind of spectrum of how much that comes in on people's lives and whether it affects them as an actor or as a person. And it's so wonderful when you meet and get to work with people who are incredibly accomplished and incredibly talented and manage somehow with all this stuff going on around them to maintain an openness and just a full kind of presence in the moment of you work with them and it just, the moment comes alive. They're actually talking and listening to you, and that is that's the most beautiful thing. And I think it's difficult when you're famous or you've done tons of stuff it would be easy to build walls and kind of protect yourself, and understandable, you've got people paying lots of attention to you or always coming at you or whatever. But that's been one of the most beautiful things, is like, oh, wow, to watch how some people just handle that with such grace and still love what they do and still have this kind of curiosity and desire to tell a great story and connect with you as an actor, it's beautiful.
Okay. So if I give you the microphone for a minute and you can address the whole industry, what would Murray like to do next?
Oh my God. It's funny because I don't really know until it comes to me. I have some ideas, I guess, but something different to what I've played before, or something, not even if it's something similar, but there's a completely different kind of angle to it. That said, though, if something comes along that's like a character that's similar to something that I've played before, but it's just like a kick-ass story that's beautifully told, with a great group of people, then like, yes, like I think you just kind of, there's a few stories that I would like to tell that I'm keeping my eye on and would like to try and develop. But for the most part, I'm just, like most of us, I think, looking for an amazing script with a great group of people, that are, base level kind. I don't mind, like, it's wonderful to work with amazing personalities and like kooky people, or people who are, different to you, or, have are manic, or have whatever issues they have. So long as there's a base level of kind, I don't think we need to work with arseholes anymore. I feel like the industry is moving away from the era of tyrants and arseholes.
Yeah. Excellent. All right.
Let's move off work for a little bit. You're still based in Provincetown, correct?
I live near Provincetown. I'm in an area called Truro. Basically, we live in the forest there.
Of course you do. Just building up that lumberjack kind of, myth.
Pretty much, yeah. Living that lumberjack dream.
Somebody has to keep you grounded.
How hard is it being away from there? I mean, it must be a very different sort of place to be based.
It's gorgeous where we live. I mean, it's just beautiful forest, and there's beaches, and it's, tons of national park, and great seafood. And I mean, it's just a beautiful part of the world. And it grounds me living in a place like that. And even though in the last couple of years I have been away a lot, most of the time, but just psychologically knowing that that's where my home is and being able to go back there is like an incredibly stabilizing, kind of grounding sort of anchor point.
So what's your reset button? Your chill out, getting back to base. How do you do that? Do you have a hobby, or are you a yoga person?
A few things. I mean, having a home now is like major. Like having a place in nature is really sort of grounding for me. I'm fortunate to have a great partner. So that's incredibly stabilizing and wonderful. I have an amazing dog who I'm just deeply, deeply in love with. I mean, not as much as my partner, but pretty damn close, I have to say. And yeah, so those things, being in nature, which is at this point being home. I mean, whenever I have time free, basically just want to be home. And I meditate every day, and have done for a long time. And that's kind of major for me. Like I just, I notice if I don't.
Well, I always like to ask these 5 sort of quick fire questions of all my guests, and we've covered some of this broadly already, but if you can just sort of sum it up in a bumper sticker, if you like, that sort of no pressure, none. So, philosophies. Do you have a mantra that you live by?
Yeah, I think this is what I strive for, to be fully present in every moment, to be with the people that I'm with, to be in the environment I'm in rather than in my head or like projecting things into the future or sort of, self-talk. And I think that, it's a kind of a great thing as an actor as well, because that's what I'm trying to do. It's what we're trying to do. It's certainly what I'm trying to do, is to you do all your prep and everything, but ultimately when you get with the other actor or actors, you just want to be like fully present there. So
Influences, right? Who would you say taught you the most important lesson in your life, and what was it?
I mean, so many important lessons from so many important people in my life. But I would have to say my mum.
Yeah.
Taught me about unconditional love by loving me unconditionally, and like extending, sort of that you should extend that to everyone, not without boundaries, but to just be, kind and give everyone the benefit of the doubt and love people regardless of or inclusive of, what their experience is and what they look like and where they come from and all that. Yeah.
Milestones. Okay, so if you had to pick one milestone that's had the most effect on you so far, what do you think it would be?
So many, but I think, moving to New York was huge for me because it sort of released me. This wasn't why I was going there, but like incidentally, it kind of released me from an old version of myself and allowed me to kind of really grow into really know myself better and let go of old sort of ideas of myself that were outdated, and just, kind of allowed me to, find myself in a much deeper way.
Mistakes. What would you say was the biggest mistake or a regret? Like, was there anything you kind of looked at and went, "Oh, that was a bad choice"?
Yeah, I mean, I think, I do subscribe to that idea. Like, I feel like you learn often the most from things that you could frame as mistakes. So are they really mistakes? They're just the points of greatest growth often. I've done some things early on in relationships where I'm like, oh my God, what was I doing? Like, what an immature kind of, idiot.
Oh, I've just got some people just here on standby.
What's that?
Yes, got some people here just to bring in to talk about that.
Oh, must be a crowded room, Spencer. I did, when I graduated from NIDA, I was offered like a 3-year contract on, I can't remember whether it was Neighbours. I think it was Neighbours. It was Neighbours or Home and Away. And I turned it down because I just come out of acting school and I was like, I want to do films and, this and that.
Yeah,
and blah, blah, blah.
Yes.
Yeah, and it was so judgmental about it. And I think that was dumb. I think I was already struggling with confidence. I feel like I could have built confidence through that. I would have learned so much about working on camera. I probably could have bought a house, but then weirdly, or maybe not weirdly, years later in New York, I was offered a contract on a soap opera. And I had the same sort of intellectual kind of resistance of like, oh my God, what are people going to think? I know that some actors will think this is really trashy and blah, blah, blah. And had to deal with my own sort of judgments about it. And I was like, I am not going to make this mistake again. And so I did it. And it was an amazing experience for me. I mean, I was like, it was consistent work in New York.
We're talking about So we're talking about Guiding Light here, correct?
Yeah, Guiding Light. Yeah, I think maybe a couple of episodes on one of the other shows, but I did a long stint. I signed for a year, and then there was a writer's strike happening at the end of that year, and it was really wonderful to have a job, and so I signed for another year. So I did 2 years on it. I got my green card because I had that contract. You know, it was like there's so many things that were right about it, but it was also like it was a redo. It was sort of getting over myself. You know, like I wasn't able to do the first time, and yeah, I learned a lot. I learned a lot about like doing a job where it's so fast that like you never. One of the soap opera actresses said to me when I was like just like feeling terrible about what I was doing because it's so fast.
Yeah.
And she was like, it's never as bad as you think it's never as bad as you think it was. And it's never as good as you want it to be, she said. You just haven't got time.
I had a similar experience. I did straight out of drama school. I did Home and Away for 6 months.
Right, yeah.
And it's exactly that. You know, I realized that gosh, you go in with this sort of, you come out of drama school, thinking I'm a graduate, blah, blah, blah. You can't help it.
Yeah.
They kind of build you up, that kind of thing in here. I will get my Oscar within 6 months. It's going to be amazing.
Exactly, yeah.
Go, oh, should I do this? And it's kind of, but saying that thought process of going, don't be judgmental. This is work. It's great. It's good. And going there and working on that show very quickly, I just went, oh shit. Like it's so fast. And I had a massively renewed respect for all people working there because there are so many great practitioners there and craftspeople.
Absolutely.
And I go, to get the performance they did onto screen is astonishing given how fast that is going. Yes, it isn't going to win them, every award known to mankind, right? But I go, it could be a train wreck. And the fact that functioning owned, all those good qualities to it that, you just don't realize how difficult that is until you try it.
I know. I had so much respect for people who work on those shows and just sort of being able to create, that much volume. Like it is really difficult. And you're right. Like it could be, it's hard to have like Oscar worthy, quality in when you're moving so fast, but like they do an amazing job. And having an opportunity to work in that, it's like boot camp. You learn so much, and it's really, I found it incredibly valuable, and I wish I wasn't so judgmental early on about that stuff. But we all learn the lessons when we have to learn them, don't we?
Last one for you.
Struggles. What would you say is the biggest thing you've had to deal with or overcome in order to be where you are right now?
Just pushing through fear, really. I don't even know what the fear was for me when I was a young actor, what I was so scared of. Failing or looking like a fool, or I don't know. When you intellectualize it, it just seems so ridiculous, which is why it was so frustrating for me. But yeah, just like chipping away at that fucking fear barrier and building up my self-confidence and like trusting myself and trusting my instincts. It just took me such a long time to sort of chip away at that. Which, I mean, it sounds such a privileged life, isn't it? Like, it's not like I grew up in a war zone or with, some
I know.
Terrible disadvantages. My biggest challenge was overcoming my fears, Spencer, but that's what it was. That's what,
I mean,
yes, you're absolutely right. We do live in a very privileged world, and this is a very privileged conversation that we're having, and not to trivialize that experience for you because, the mind is a very powerful thing, and finding your best self and your way to being your best self is really, really important, and I think you are a shining light of someone who has done that, and it is so lovely to see you soaring these days. I mean, gosh, we met like 25 years ago or something like that, and you have always had a positivity to you. And so to watch your journey, and, it has been so lovely to see you really kind of step into your flow. So congratulations and thank you so much for taking the time today, as I know you're very, very busy, and I really do appreciate it. And I just cannot wait to see what happens next.
Thanks. Well, yeah, it's such a pleasure talking with you. And thank you for saying all those lovely things. I feel very, very fortunate and very glad that we met, however long ago that was, 25 years ago or whatever. Whoa.
Well, that's it for this episode of McLaren Versus. I am Spencer McLaren. Thank you for spending some time with us. If you enjoyed this chat, don't forget to follow and leave us a review.